Hello, my name is William, and welcome to Dragon X Dominion, a realm where dragon legends are forged in fire, honor, and forgotten worlds. I will be your narrator and guide through these epic lands. If you crave powerful stories, legendary dragons, and wars that echo through eternity, then you found your home, ladies and gentlemen. So subscribe, and claim your place among these legends.
The incinerator hummed its usual deadly song, a low vibration that David Reed had learned to ignore during his 8 months working maintenance on the Tyrallian breeding station. Most sounds became background noise eventually. The hiss of air recyclers, the click of boots on metal floors, the constant drone of machinery keeping thousands of dragons alive in their climate-controlled pens. But this sound was different. David paused, his hands still gripping the waste bin he'd been hauling toward the compactor. Somewhere beneath the mechanical rumble, he heard something organic, something alive. A whimper so faint he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. He shouldn't investigate. Humans didn't investigate on Imperial stations. They kept their heads down, did their jobs, collected their credits, and went home when their contracts expired. That was survival. That was smart. David set down the bin and followed the sound anyway. The disposal chute gaped open like a metal throat, designed to swallow anything the Empire deemed worthless. Broken equipment, contaminated materials, failed experiments. David had learned not to ask what got thrown down there. He'd learned not to care. The whimper came again. He leaned over the edge, peering into the darkness. His headlamp cut through the shadows and his heart stopped. A dragon hatchling lay crumpled at the bottom of the chute, no bigger than a terrier. Blood streaked its snout where it had torn free from its egg. Its scales were dull bronze, nothing like the brilliant colors David had seen on the elite breeding stock. One wing hung at an odd angle, too small compared to its body, and one eye was clouded white, milky and sightless. A red mark glowed on the hatchling's flank, the disposal designation. Imperial assessors had examined this creature within hours of hatching and found it wanting. The hatchling looked up at David with its one good eye, golden and terrified, and so desperately alive that every instinct in David's earthborn brain screamed at him to do something. His people had domesticated wolves into dogs. They'd bottle-fed orphaned deer, rescued beached whales, and cried over cartoon animals. Humans couldn't help themselves. They saw something helpless, and their hearts made decisions their brains knew were stupid. David reached into the chute. The hatchling flinched, pressing itself against the metal wall. It tried to make itself smaller. Tried to disappear. David had seen that look before in his neighbor's dog after it had been kicked. Pure learned fear of anything bigger. "Hey," David whispered. "Hey, it's okay, I'm not gonna hurt you." The words meant nothing to the hatchling. It didn't speak human languages. But maybe his tone meant something because the little dragon stopped trembling quite so hard. David stretched further, his boots barely keeping purchase on the floor. His fingers brushed warm scales. The hatchling made a sound between a whine and a chirp. "Come on, buddy, let me help you." He got his hands around the dragon's small body and lifted. The hatchling weighed maybe 15 pounds, all of it muscle and bone and desperate life. It didn't fight him. Maybe it was too scared. Maybe it understood on some instinctive level that David wasn't a threat. Once the hatchling was out of the chute, David tucked it inside his maintenance jacket. The dragon immediately curled against his chest, seeking warmth. Its body temperature was dropping. Dragons needed heat, especially newborns. The disposal chute had been draining the life from this one degree by degree. David zipped his jacket most of the way up, leaving just enough gap for air. The hatchling's head poked out near his collar, one golden eye watching everything with intense focus. "You're mine now," David said quietly. "I don't know what I'm gonna do with you, but you're mine." Getting back to his quarters meant walking through 3 security checkpoints. David's heart hammered against his ribs at each one. The guards barely glanced at him. Humans were beneath notice. Just another maintenance worker hauling trash, fixing pipes, doing the jobs Tyrallians considered too menial for their own people. The hatchling stayed perfectly still, as if it knew discovery meant death. David's room was small, barely bigger than a closet. A bunk, a footlocker, a tiny washroom. But it was private, and right now that was all that mattered. He set the hatchling on his bed and really looked at it for the first time under proper light. The dull bronze scales, the undersized wings, the clouded eye. Every feature the Empire had marked as defective. David saw something else. He saw the way the dragon's good eye tracked his movements with sharp intelligence. He saw how it tested its small wings, stretching them despite the pain, already trying to figure out its own body. He saw the way it tilted its head to compensate for its blind side, learning to navigate a world it could only half see. "You're not broken," David said. "You're just different." The hatchling chirped. Its stomach rumbled loud enough to hear. David had no idea what dragons ate. He raided his own food supplies, offering bits of protein rations. The hatchling sniffed each piece carefully before eating, its movements precise despite being only hours old. When it finished eating, the dragon climbed into David's lap like it belonged there. It circled twice, then curled up and started making a sound David had never heard before. A deep, rhythmic rumble that vibrated through its whole body. Purring, the dragon was purring. David rested his hand on its warm back, feeling the steady thrum of contentment. He'd thrown away his contract, his safety, probably his future. The Empire didn't forgive theft, especially theft of their property. When they discovered what he'd done, there would be consequences. But the hatchling nuzzled against his hand, making that sound of absolute trust, and David knew he'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. "Need to call you something?" he murmured. "Can't just keep saying, 'Hey, you.'" The dragon looked up at him with its one good eye. Harley, David decided. "Had a dog named Harley when I was a kid. He only had one good eye too. Best friend I ever had." The newly named Harley yawned, showing tiny sharp teeth, and fell asleep in David's lap. David sat there in his tiny room on an imperial station, holding a dragon that should have been ashes, and smiled. 3 weeks changed everything. Harley grew like weeds in summer rain, adding inches every day until he reached the size of a large dog. His scales shifted from dull bronze to something richer, deeper, catching light in ways that made David pause sometimes just to stare. The undersized wings stretched and strengthened, though they'd probably never be proportional. The blind eye stayed milky white, but Harley learned to navigate perfectly without it. David quickly discovered that imperial dragon-rearing protocols were complete garbage. The breeding manuals said dragons needed isolation to prevent bonding before proper conditioning. They said precise temperature control, measured nutrient paste, and scheduled exercise periods were essential. They said dragons were solitary predators who only tolerated handlers through dominance training. Harley made a mockery of every single rule. The dragon refused to sleep alone. Every night he climbed onto David's bunk and sprawled across his legs, purring so loud the walls vibrated. He didn't want nutrient paste. He wanted whatever David was eating, and he'd sit there with his head tilted, staring with that one golden eye until David gave in and shared. And solitary, Harley followed David everywhere. When David worked on repairs, Harley watched with intense focus, learning to hand him tools with his mouth. When David ate in the mess hall, Harley squeezed under the table and rested his head on David's boots. When David showered, Harley sat outside the stall and made sad noises until he came back out. "You're a complete mama's boy," David told him one evening. Harley just rumbled happily and butted his head against David's chest hard enough to bruise. The other human workers noticed, of course. You couldn't hide a growing dragon in a maintenance bay, but there was an unspoken code among Deathworlders working imperial contracts. You didn't snitch. You didn't ask questions. You definitely didn't tell the Tyrallians anything they didn't need to know. A woman named Ruth, who ran the water recycling systems, cornered David one day. "How long you think you can keep this up?" she asked quietly. David was replacing a burnt-out circuit board while Harley lounged nearby, gnawing on a piece of scrap metal. "Long as I can. Empire finds out, they'll kill him. Then they'll kill you. I know. Ruth watched Harley for a long moment. The dragon had given up on the metal and was now trying to catch his own tail, spinning in circles like a puppy. My daughter had a dog back on Earth, border collie, smartest damn animal I ever met. She paused. Your boy there reminds me of her. Yeah, David said softly. Me too. Ruth didn't report them. None of the humans did. They brought David extra food scraps for Harley. They covered for him when he needed to sneak the dragon between sections. They became accomplices through simple, stubborn human solidarity. Then came the plasma conduit incident. David was doing routine maintenance in one of the sublevels, replacing worn seals on a high-pressure line. Harley lay nearby, half asleep in a patch of warm air from a heating vent. It was boring work, the kind David could do in his sleep. The conduit ruptured without warning. Superheated plasma erupted from the breach, a jet of sun-temperature gas that would have vaporized David's face in a fraction of a second. He didn't even have time to flinch, didn't have time to think, didn't have time to do anything but die. Harley moved faster than thought. The dragon launched himself between David and the plasma blast, wings flaring wide. The superheated stream struck his chest and belly, scales designed by millions of years of evolution to handle dragon fire itself. Harley roared, not in pain, but in pure fury at the thing that dared threaten his human. David slammed the emergency cutoff. The plasma died. Silence crashed down except for Harley's heavy breathing. Oh God, David gasped. Harley, are you okay? Let me see. He ran his hands over the dragon's chest, checking for injuries. The scales were scorched, blackened in places, but underneath the hide was intact. Dragons were built to handle heat. Harley had taken a blast that would have killed David without even getting seriously hurt. But that wasn't what made David's hands shake. Harley had known. Somehow the dragon had sensed the danger before David's own reflexes could react. And without hesitation, without thinking about his own safety, Harley had put himself between David and death. David pulled the dragon into a hug, pressing his face against that warm neck. You saved my life, buddy. You saved my life. Harley rumbled and licked David's ear with a tongue like warm sandpaper. His body language radiated simple contentment. Of course he'd saved David. What else would he do? That night, lying in his bunk with Harley draped across him like a scaly weighted blanket, David realized something that should have been obvious from the start. This wasn't a pet. This wasn't even just a rescued animal. Harley was his partner, his friend, his family. The dragon lifted his head, looking at David with that one perfect golden eye, and David could have sworn he saw understanding there. Not animal instinct, not simple conditioning. Real, genuine comprehension of what they meant to each other. You're not supposed to be able to bond like this, David whispered. The Empire says it takes years of conditioning, says dragons don't form natural attachments. Harley made a soft churring sound and rested his head back on David's chest. Yeah, David said, I don't believe them either. Outside his tiny room, the station hummed with imperial efficiency. Thousands of dragons being bred, trained, broken into weapons and tools and status symbols, treated like equipment instead of living beings. David held Harley closer and made a decision. If the Empire came for them, he wouldn't go quietly. He wouldn't let them take Harley back to that cold, clinical world where dragons were just biological resources to be used and discarded. They'd have to go through him first. Harley purred in his sleep, completely trusting, completely safe. David stayed awake long into the night, already planning their escape. Lieutenant Cavros arrived on a Tuesday morning with the kind of cold efficiency that made David's blood run ice cold. Word had spread through the human workers in minutes. Imperial enforcement was asking questions. Specifically, they were asking about missing dragons. More specifically, they were asking about one particular hatchling marked for disposal that never made it to the incinerators. David knew he was out of time. Harley had grown even larger now, nearly the size of a full-grown horse. Hiding him was impossible. David's quarters were too small. The maintenance bays had too much traffic. Everywhere they went, people saw them. And while the humans stayed quiet, the Tyrallian staff noticed everything eventually. The knock on his door came during evening shift change. David opened it to find a Tyrallian officer standing in the corridor, scales gleaming silver blue under the harsh lights. Lieutenant Cavros had the bearing of someone who'd never questioned an order in his life. His eyes were flat, emotionless, completely certain of his own authority. Behind David, Harley growled low in his chest. David Reed, human maintenance worker, contract number 77429, Cavros said. It wasn't a question. You are in possession of Imperial property. Designation TH7719, marked for disposal on Station Day 315. His name is Harley, David said quietly, and he's not property. Cavros looked past him at the dragon. Harley had positioned himself between David and the door, wings slightly spread, head low. Every line of his body screamed threat. The creature is defective, Cavros continued as if David hadn't spoken. Undersized wing structure, impaired vision, inadequate scale pigmentation, it cannot serve the Empire's needs. It should have been terminated. He's not defective, he's perfect. Perfect, Cavros actually seemed. Puzzled by the concept. It cannot fly properly, it cannot see threats from one side. Its appearance is substandard for breeding stock or ceremonial display. By what metric is it perfect? David felt Harley press against his leg, solid and warm and absolutely real. He's loyal, he's smart, he's brave, he saved my life, that's what makes him perfect. Irrelevant emotional attachment. The creature belongs to the Empire. You will surrender it immediately for proper disposal. You will serve penalty time for theft of Imperial resources. 5 years labor in the mining colonies. No. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Cavros's hand moved toward his weapon. Harley's growl turned into something that rattled the walls, a sound that came from deep in his chest where fire lived. The dragon's scales began to shimmer with heat. Harley, easy, David said, putting his hand on the dragon's neck. The scales were hot enough to sting. Easy, boy. Harley quieted but didn't move. His one good eye stayed locked on Cavros with absolute focus. The blind side didn't matter. Harley could sense every tiny movement the officer made, could feel the threat radiating from him like heat from a star. Cavros studied them both with something that might have been fascination if he'd been capable of that emotion. The creature obeys you. Impossible without conditioning protocols. Dragons do not bond naturally. Tell him that, David said. You have committed theft. You have disrupted Imperial resource management. You have violated your contract terms. Cavros listed the charges like he was reading a grocery list. Surrender the creature now and your sentence will be reduced. He's not a creature, he's not in it. He's Harley and he's mine and I'm his and you're not taking him. Then I will take him by force. Cavros drew his weapon, a sleek plasma pistol designed to punch through heavy armor. At this range, it would cut through David like paper. Harley exploded into motion. The dragon lunged forward, jaws open, claws extended. He was huge now, powerful, built from Deathworld evolution to be an apex predator. Cavros stumbled backward, bringing his weapon up. Harley, no, David shouted. Stop. The dragon froze mid-lunge, every muscle locked tight. His jaws were inches from Cavros's throat. One golden eye blazed with protective fury, but he held himself perfectly still, trembling with the effort of fighting. His own instincts. Because David had told him to stop. Cavros stared at the dragon, at the way Harley obeyed even when every fiber of his being wanted to tear the threat apart, at the absolute trust in that obedience. Impossible, Cavros whispered. Back away from the door, David said quietly, slowly. Cavros did, his weapon still raised. Harley tracked him with minute adjustments of his head, compensating for his blind side with practiced ease. When the officer reached the corridor, David slapped the door control. It slid shut with a solid thunk. He heard Cavros on the other side speaking into his communicator, calling for backup, reporting the situation. David pressed his forehead against Harley's. "We need to go right now." The dragon rumbled, understanding. David had prepared for this. Over the past weeks, he'd stashed supplies in hidden spots throughout the station. He'd memorized guard rotations. He'd talked to the other human workers about exit routes. He'd made friends with a cargo pilot who asked fewer questions than he should. But preparation only got you so far when the Empire wanted you dead. Ruth met them at the cargo bay entrance, her face grim. "Transport's ready. Captain owes me favors. He'll get you to the frontier zones, but after that you're on your own." "Thank you," David said. "Don't thank me, just get that boy somewhere safe." Ruth looked at Harley, who had ducked his head to fit through the doorway. "He deserves better than this place." They made it to the transport through service corridors, avoiding main routes. Harley moved with surprising stealth for something his size, his claws clicking softly on metal floors. The cargo pilot was a grizzled human named Owen who took one look at Harley and whistled. "That's what all the fuss is about? Hell, he's beautiful." "Can you get us out?" David asked. "Already got clearance for a supply run. They don't check cargo holds too carefully. Empire thinks we're too stupid to smuggle anything valuable." Owen grinned. "They're wrong about that." Harley climbed into the cargo hold and immediately curled up in the largest empty space, making himself as small as possible. David squeezed in next to him. "Gonna be a rough ride," Owen warned. "And when we hit the frontier, you're gonna need a plan. Empire has a long reach." "We'll figure it out," David said. The transport shuddered as engines fired up, through the hold small. Viewport, David watched the breeding station fall away. Somewhere back there, Cavros was probably organizing a pursuit. The Empire didn't forgive theft. They especially didn't forgive humans making them look foolish. Harley rested his head in David's lap, making that deep purring sound that meant contentment and safety. David stroked the dragon's warm scales and watched the stars slide past. They were fugitives now, criminals in Imperial space. But they were together and they were free, and somehow that was enough. The frontier zones existed in the cracks between Imperial authority and open rebellion. Independent stations, colony worlds, and trading posts where people asked fewer questions, and the Empire's grip loosened just enough for free breathing. Owen's transport dropped them at a station called Crossroads, a massive spinning wheel of metal that served as a hub for dozens of smaller settlements. It wasn't pretty. Rust stained the walls. The air smelled like recycled sweat and engine grease, but nobody looked twice at a human with a dragon. "This is as far as I go," Owen said. "You need work, talk to the docking master. Place like this always needs mechanics, and your boy there." He nodded at Harley. "Keep him close. Not everyone out here plays nice." David thanked him and stepped onto the station with everything he owned in a single bag, and a dragon the size of a draft horse at his side. Harley's head swiveled constantly, taking in everything with his one good eye. The crowds of different species, the mix of languages, the constant noise and movement. His blind side made him nervous in unfamiliar places, but he'd learned to position himself so David covered that angle. They moved together like they'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. The docking master was a scarred woman named Petra who looked David up and down with the kind of assessment that came from years of sizing up strangers. "You're the human with the dragon everyone's talking about." Word traveled fast apparently, "Just looking for work." "Can you fix things?" "Pretty much anything mechanical." Petra studied Harley. The dragon stared back calmly. "Dragon doesn't have a handler's mark, doesn't have Imperial conditioning scars. How'd you manage that?" "He's not handled, he's partnered." "That's not how dragons work." "Tell him that." Something that might have been a smile crossed Petra's face. "Fair enough, we got 3. Broken recyclers, 2 seized airlocks, and a power conduit that keeps blowing circuits." Fix those and we'll talk about permanent work. David fixed them all in 2 days. Harley helped, learning to hold tools, to watch for hazards, to work alongside David like any apprentice. People stopped to stare. Dragons didn't do that. Dragons were weapons or pets or status symbols, not working partners. But Harley was different. Anyone could see it. The jobs kept coming. David developed a reputation as the mechanic who could fix anything, probably because he had a dragon who could reach into spaces humans couldn't and who had an uncanny sense for finding problems. They became a fixture on crossroads. The human and his dragon, the pair who shouldn't exist but did anyway. Then, 3 months after their arrival, a Tyrallian reclamation fleet entered the system. The announcement came over station-wide communications. All citizens were to cooperate fully with Imperial authorities. There was no mention of what they wanted, but David knew. Harley knew too. The dragon pressed against David's legs, making low, worried sounds. "I know, buddy," David murmured. "I know." Commander Celes arrived with an escort of armed soldiers. She was older than Cavro's, her scales marked with the scars of long service. She carried authority like a weapon, and when she spoke, people listened. She found David in his workshop, 3 levels down from the main docking ring. Harley was instantly on his feet, positioning himself between David and the soldiers. "David Reed," Celes said, "you are charged with theft of Imperial property, violation of contract terms, and unlawful flight from prosecution. Surrender yourself and the stolen dragon. You will receive a fair trial." "He's not stolen. He was marked for disposal. I saved him from death." "The method of disposal is irrelevant. The creature was property of the Tyrallian Empire. You had no authority to take it." "His name is Harley, and he's not property, not yours, not anyone's." Celes looked at the dragon with clinical interest. "Designation TH7719, defective, should have been terminated at hatching. Instead, you have allowed it to grow, to consume resources, to exist beyond its designated purpose." "His purpose is whatever he chooses, same as any living being." "Dragons do not choose. They are bred for specific functions. This one has no function. It is waste." Harley growled, a sound that made tools rattle on their hooks. David put his hand on the dragon's neck, feeling heat building under the scales. "Easy," he whispered. "Let me handle this." Celes watched the interaction with something that might have been curiosity. "The creature obeys you, no conditioning protocols, no handler's marks, no dominance training. How?" "He trusts me, I trust him, that's all it takes." "Trust is inefficient. Obedience is what matters." "Then you've never understood dragons at all." The soldiers shifted, hands moving toward weapons. Harley's growl deepened. David could feel the tension building like pressure before an explosion. Then Petra's voice cut through the air. "Commander Celes, you're threatening one of my workers on my station without proper jurisdiction." The docking master stood in the workshop doorway with about 24 other colonists behind her. Humans, mostly, but others too. Species who'd ended up in the frontier zones because they didn't fit in Imperial space. "This is an Imperial matter," Celes said coldly. "This is my station, and out here Imperial authority ends at your hull plating. You would defend a thief, risk retaliation for one human and one defective dragon." Petra smiled without humor. "We've handled Imperial retaliation before. Besides, David's one of ours now. You don't get to take him." The other colonists moved forward, forming a wall between the soldiers and David. They weren't armed. They weren't soldiers. They were mechanics and traders and farmers and people who'd come to the frontier for freedom. But they stood together. Celes looked at them all with the kind of cold calculation that came from years of military service. She could take David by force. Her soldiers could clear these civilians easily. But it would be a massacre, and that would make the Empire look like monsters. That would turn the frontier zones from reluctant independence to open rebellion. "This is not over," Celes said quietly. "The Empire has a long memory, human. We will reclaim what is ours." "He was never yours," David replied. "He was abandoned, I just gave him a home." Celes and her soldiers withdrew. David listened to their boots echoing down the corridor until silence returned. Petra turned to him. "You know she's right, they'll be back." "I know. Was it worth it, throwing away your whole life for one dragon?" David looked at Harley, who was leaning against him with absolute trust, purring loud enough to feel through the floor. "Every single second," David said. The colonists dispersed, but something had changed. David wasn't just a worker anymore. He was a symbol, proof that the Empire could be defied, that dragons could choose their own paths, that one human with enough stubborn compassion could change everything. Harley rumbled contentedly and licked David's face. "Yeah, definitely worth it." A year passed on Crossroads Station, and David learned what it meant to live free. Harley grew into his full size, a magnificent dragon with bronze scales that caught light like metal, wings that could carry him short distances despite their odd proportions, and one golden eye that saw more than most creatures with two. The blind eye never healed, but Harley never needed it. He navigated the station with perfect confidence, his other senses compensating. People stopped seeing him as a dragon and started seeing him as Harley. The workers' kids played near him without fear. Shop owners saved scraps for him. He had favorite spots in different sections where he'd curl up and nap while David worked. But the peace couldn't last forever. The Imperial fleet returned on a cold morning when the station was between shifts. This time they came in force, 3 warships, not just one. Commander Celes wasn't asking anymore. She was demanding. Station-wide alarms blared. Petra's voice came over communications, tight with tension. "All personnel, we have an Imperial blockade. They're demanding we hand over David Reed and the Dragon Harley. I told them to go to hell, but I'm putting it to a vote. This could mean war." David was in his workshop when the announcement came. Harley lifted his head from where he'd been dozing, ears perked forward. "This is my fault," David said quietly. "I can't ask the whole station to fight for us." Harley rumbled disagreement, bumping his head against David's chest hard enough to bruise. "I know you don't want to go. Neither do I, but people could die." The dragon's response was to plant himself in front of the door, wings spread. Not moving, not surrendering, making his position absolutely clear. David's communicator buzzed, Petra's voice. "David, get to the main assembly hall now." He walked through corridors that had become home, Harley at his side. People watched them pass. Some nodded, some looked. Scared, all of them had a decision to make. The assembly hall was packed. Hundreds of colonists, representing dozens of species and worlds. The vote was simple. Hand over David and Harley to avoid Imperial retaliation or stand firm and face the consequences. Petra stood on the central platform. "Before we vote, David wants to speak." David hadn't actually said that, but he climbed up anyway. Harley stayed close, too large for the platform, so he settled on the floor beside it. "I know what you're all thinking," David started. "One human and one dragon aren't worth starting a war over, and you're right, we're not." He paused, looking at the crowd. "But this isn't about us anymore. It's about what the Empire thinks it can take. Today it's a dragon they marked for disposal. Tomorrow it's your property, your freedom, your choices. The Empire doesn't see beings. It sees resources to be used or discarded." Harley made a soft sound. David rested his hand on the dragon's head. Harley was supposed to die because he wasn't perfect enough for their standards. Because one eye couldn't see and his wings were too small and his scales weren't shiny enough. But he's brave and loyal and smart and kind. He's everything the Empire claims to value, except he doesn't fit in their boxes. David's voice roughened. "I'm not asking you to die for us. I'm asking you to stand for the principle that living beings get to choose their own worth. That freedom means something out here in the frontier. That we're more than what the Empire tells us we're allowed to be." Silence filled the hall. Then a voice from the back. "I vote we tell the Empire to shove it." Laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the tension. More voices joined in, species that had fled Imperial control. Humans who'd seen enough of authority, traders who valued independence more than safety. One by one they stood, making their choice clear. The vote wasn't even close. Petra grinned fiercely. "Looks like you're stuck with us, David, and the Empire can come take you if they think they're tough enough." Celes tried one more time. She sent a message directly to the station, her face cold on every screen. "You are harboring a criminal and stolen property. Surrender them or face military action." Petra's response was broadcast on every frequency. "This is Crossroads Station. We recognize no imperial authority here. David Reed is under our protection. The Dragon Harley is a free citizen. You want them, you come through us." Celes didn't bluff. Her warships opened fire. But Crossroads Station had been built by people who knew the Empire might come someday. Hidden weapons came online. Defense grids activated. And every armed ship in dock launched, a ragtag fleet of traders and haulers and fighters who decided that freedom was worth the risk. The battle lasted 6 hours. Harley stayed with David in the reinforced shelter, listening to the thunder of weapons fire transmitted through the station's bones. The dragon pressed close, sensing David's fear, offering what comfort he could. When the firing stopped, David held his breath. Then Petra's voice, tired but triumphant. "They're retreating, we held." Cheers erupted throughout the station. David sagged against Harley in relief. The dragon rumbled and licked his face, tasting tears. Commander Celes' final transmission came through on the emergency channel. "You have made an enemy of the Empire, Crossroads Station. This will not be forgotten." But she left, and the frontier zones had proven they could stand together. David walked through the damaged sections with Harley, seeing the scorch marks from plasma fire, the breaches in outer hulls, the places where the Empire had tried to break them. People were already repairing the damage, working together with the kind of efficiency that came from shared purpose. An older man approached, someone David recognized from the market district. "That dragon of yours, he worth all this." David looked at Harley, who was using his bulk to help shore up a damaged wall while welders worked. The dragon glanced back at him with that one golden eye, and David saw everything they'd been through together. The rescue from the disposal chute, the months of bonding, the choice to run rather than submit, the community that had formed around a simple truth. "Yeah," David said, "he's worth everything." The man nodded slowly. "Good, because we just declared war on the biggest empire in known space for him. Nice to know it means something." He walked away, and David realized what had really happened here. It wasn't about one dragon anymore. It was about proving that the Empire's authority had limits, that their definitions of worth and value and purpose weren't absolute. Harley bumped his head against David's shoulder, nearly knocking him over. "We changed things today." David told him, "Maybe just a little, maybe just here, but we changed them." The dragon purred agreement. Out in the black, Imperial ships retreated, but the idea stayed behind, spreading through the frontier zones like wildfire. Beings could choose their own worth, and sometimes that was worth fighting for. 2 years after the battle, a young woman named Iris arrived at Crossroads Station, carrying a bundle wrapped in thermal cloth. David was under a cooling unit when Harley made a sound he'd never heard before, a soft, questioning chirp. The dragon's massive head turned toward the entrance to the workshop, ears perked forward with intense interest. David rolled out from under the unit to find a stranger standing nervously in the doorway. She was human, maybe 20 years old, with the kind of exhaustion that came from running too far too fast. But it was what she carried that made David's heart stop. The bundle moved. Something small and alive shifted inside the cloth. "You're David Reed," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "The one who saved Harley." "Yeah," David stood slowly, wiping grease from his hands. Harley moved closer, still making that curious sound. "I'm Iris. I work at an Imperial breeding station." "Worked," she corrected herself. "I can't go back." She unwrapped the bundle carefully. Inside was a dragon hatchling, barely days old. Its scales shimmered between blue and green, catching light like oil on water, beautiful colors that should have made it valuable. But one of its legs was twisted, bent at an angle that would never straighten properly. "They marked her for disposal," Iris whispered. "Just like they marked Harley, but I heard what you did. I heard about the station that stood up to the Empire. I thought maybe—" Her voice cracked. "I couldn't just let them kill her." David took the hatchling gently. She was warm and fragile and perfect. Her small golden eyes looked up at him with the same desperate trust he'd seen in Harley's gaze 2 years ago. Harley leaned in, sniffing the baby dragon carefully. The hatchling chirped at him. Harley rumbled back, a deep sound of acceptance and protection. "What's her name?" David asked. "She doesn't have one, just a designation number." "Not anymore." David studied the hatchling. "How about River? She's got that flowing color thing going on." The newly named River chirped agreement and tried to bite his finger with teeth too. "Small to hurt." Iris sagged with relief. "Thank you. I didn't know where else to go. The Empire is hunting me now. My contract is void. I'm a fugitive." "Welcome to the club," David smiled. "Harley and I are founding members." Over the next few weeks, Iris settled into life on Crossroads Station. She was good with her hands, skilled at precision work that the rougher mechanics couldn't handle. She and River bonded the same way David and Harley had, with none of the Empire's brutal conditioning protocols. Just time and trust and genuine affection. River's twisted leg never straightened, but she learned to move just fine with 3 good legs and one that dragged slightly. Harley appointed himself her teacher, showing her how to compensate for physical differences, how to use other senses, how to be strong in ways the Empire never measured. Then more arrived. A handler named Owen, no relation to the pilot, brought a dragon with respiratory problems. A breeder named Chen smuggled out twins that were too small to be useful. A guard named Yuki rescued a hatchling with a neurological condition that made its movements jerky and uncoordinated. They all came to Crossroads Station. They all found David, and they all brought dragons that the Empire had marked as worthless. David's workshop became a sanctuary. Harley became a mentor to every rescued dragon, teaching them that their differences were strengths, not failures. The station adapted, building spaces large enough for dragons, finding work that suited their unique abilities. The Empire noticed, of course, they always did. But after the battle, Crossroads Station had become a symbol. Attacking it again would spark rebellion across the frontier zones. So they watched and fumed and planned, but they didn't act. 3 years after rescuing Harley, David stood in the expanded workshop watching a dozen dragons of different sizes and colors working alongside their human partners. River was helping Iris with a delicate circuit repair. A dragon named Storm was using his oversized claws to move heavy equipment. A little one called Whisper, who couldn't roar properly, was testing ventilation systems with her sensitive hearing. Every one of them had been marked for disposal. Every one of them was thriving. Harley pressed against David's side, now so large he had to duck to fit through most doorways. The blind eye had never bothered him. The undersized wings had. Strengthened enough to carry him short distances. The dull bronze scales had deepened into something rich and beautiful. "We started something," David said quietly. "Didn't mean to, just wanted to save one dragon." Harley rumbled, a sound David had learned meant contentment and agreement and home. Petra found them later carrying a data pad with news from the frontier. "You're not gonna believe this. There's a breeding station on the outer rim. Workers went on strike, refusing to cull hatchlings. They're demanding the Empire change the disposal protocols." "Will it work?" David asked. "Probably not, but they're trying. Because of you, because of Harley, because everyone's heard the story now. The human who said one dragon mattered more than the whole Empire's authority." David looked at Harley, who was now showing a nervous hatchling how to use his tail for balance. The big dragon was patient and gentle, everything the Empire said dragons couldn't be without conditioning. "It wasn't about authority," David said. It was about seeing someone who needed help and not being able to walk away. That's all. That's everything, Petra corrected. That's what makes you Deathworlders so damn dangerous. You can't leave well enough alone. You see something suffering and you have to fix it, even when it's stupid, even when it costs everything. Is that a compliment? It's a warning to the Empire, she grinned. They think they can control everything through force and rules and designated purposes. They don't understand that one human with enough stubborn compassion can tear down their whole system. That night, David sat outside the workshop with Harley and River and all the other rescued dragons. They filled the observation deck, a wild mix of sizes and colors and abilities. None of them perfect by Imperial standards, all of them perfect by the standards that actually mattered. You know what's funny? David said to Harley. The Empire was right about one thing: you were defective by their standards, too different to be useful. Harley made a questioning sound. But that's what made you special. You didn't fit in their boxes, so you had to make your own path, and that path led here to all this. David gestured at the other dragons, to proving that their standards were garbage all along. The dragon purred and rested his enormous head in David's lap, careful not to crush him. Somewhere in Imperial space, breeding stations still operated. Hatchlings were still assessed and judged and disposed of when they failed to meet requirements. But now there were whispers, stories of a place in the frontier where dragons could be free, where humans chose compassion over compliance. And one by one, the ones who couldn't walk away started making the journey. Because the Empire had marked a dragon hatchling for disposal. A human had marked him as worthy of love. And that simple act of stubborn kindness had started a revolution that would burn across the stars, fueled by the most dangerous force in the galaxy, people who refused to accept that any life was worthless. David fell asleep that night with Harley's warmth surrounding him, River purring nearby, and the sound of dragons breathing in the darkness. Free dragons, chosen dragons. Dragons who knew they mattered not because the Empire said so, but because someone had cared enough to fight for them. The galaxy would never be the same. And it started with one human who couldn't walk past a disposal chute without checking if something inside was still alive.